That was Finlandia, the most famous classical song of Finland. And they had whoever did that did a great job with the images. So I thought I would just play that before I got started, just as something to kind of get people interested in Finland. So I'm going to tell you about adventures in Finland for 14 days in the month of May. I was in Finland with Matti Manninen, and I'm going to talk about their educational system and our very own MCC exchange program. The exchange program is open to any employee, administration, faculty, or staff. Anyone can do it. So first things first, I brought treats. These are licorice. They have a little bit of like pine sap. It won't hurt you. But it just sort of gives it a special little kick. So I'm going to pass these around. Finnish people are crazy about this. So not only do you get to see, but you get to taste a little bit of Finland. So, thanks for coming. These are my goals. Number one, I'm going to entertain and educate you about Finland during your lunch break. So, thanks for coming. Number two, inform those who might be considering participating in the exchange program, what they can expect, what you have to do, and to teach you a little bit about the Finnish educational system. And anyone interested, number two, this is your most important contact. Lindsay Carson. I have to give her a lot of credit for setting this up and for helping me and Matti along the way. She does an outstanding job. And so here's her phone number and her email. You would definitely want to contact her. This is a photo I took, reindeer. In the northern part of Finland, they're everywhere. They're almost like white-tailed deer or cattle. In this area, they're just wherever you go, you see reindeer just roaming about eating grass. And that was definitely an interesting surprise to me. So here's Finland. We're in the north of Europe. I was telling some of my students this summer in class about Finland, and my history map doesn't have Finland on it because it's too far north. So I had to look for a different map. So this is way north, right? Here's Russia. Here's Estonia. Poland's way down here. Finland is a Nordic country. There's 5 of them. Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, but it's not a Scandinavian country. The Finns are a different ethnicity, and they have an entirely different language than the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Danes, and the Icelanders. Here's a little bit better map, and I may come back to this from time to time to refer to where I was. So where does Matti Manninen live? He lives way up in the north here in Kajaani, right on this lake. And if there's one thing that I kept thinking about in Finland is I thought this is a lot like Minnesota. Forests, trees, lakes, lots of open space, lots of nature. Helsinki is in the south, and the Arctic Circle is right up here. So Matti's not very far from the Arctic Circle, and I'll show you some of our adventures going into the far north. But this is really, really far north. So usually the participants in the program tend to come from the colleges in this eastern part of Finland between Kajaani and Helsinki, this area right here. So if you participate in the program, you don't know where you're going to end up. And I ended up, I think I was the farthest north participant up here in Kajaani. Matti was kind enough to take us on a drive up to the Arctic Circle, just to the north of Rovaniemi, and we saw a lot of reindeer along the way. So here's Matti and his wife, Christina. This is where I stayed. This is their house. Nature and hiking. If you love the outdoors and if you love nature, Finland would definitely be the place for you. This is one thing that I learned is I was really surprised because I like hiking, I like nature, and I was really surprised just to see how much of it they have, and really sort of unspoiled, wild spaces. One of the things Matti would point out to me is that if you look on the trees, There's moss that grows on it, especially on the branches. It's a lot like the Spanish moss in the south, like in New Orleans. He said when you see that in a forest, you know it's a healthy forest. You know that there's no air pollution because that moss is really sensitive, and the slightest air pollution, it will die. So I was just really in amazement of all of the wild berries, all of the nature that was out there that was just really untouched. And one of the things I learned at one of the colleges that specializes in tourism is that people come from far and wide to see this nature. There are a lot of tourists from Russia that come to Finland just for the nature. In fact, I ran into a number of people that came from the south of Finland, from Helsinki, that moved to the north because they said they always vacationed there, and they decided that's where they wanted to live. And I thought, wow, that was really interesting. Yeah, anytime, ask a question. Go ahead.
You were there in May?
Yeah, during the month of May.
What was the temperature there?
Well, the temperature varied. It was never hot. Sometimes in the morning it was quite cold. I think, because I had to kind of do this mental calculation in Celsius, right? So 0 is 32. I think one morning we woke up and it was either 3 or 4. So that's about like 44 degrees, pretty cold. And I know room temperature was about 22. And so it never really went over 22. The typical daytime high was like 16 or 17, which would be about 62 degrees. So you're really looking at between like 40 and 70. Last summer, Matti told me that they didn't have a summer, that the temperature never went above 62 degrees and it rained. So you just never know what you're going to get. And I've heard from time to time they can have little heat waves, but generally it's a very cool place.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So again, with the nature, I had to choose just a couple of photos. I have over 200 photos of nature, lakes and forests. And I was a little bit surprised because they actually have some hills in some places, which is a bit different than Minnesota. I think you have to go towards Lake Superior to find hills in Minnesota. But it was actually quite hilly, but definitely a glacial geography. Here's some hills for you. This is quite a beautiful ravine. And one of the cool things is that this would be a photo more for my history class than this one, but just below this cliff face, there's an area where there's ancient pictograms, pictures that were drawn by people 7,000 years ago. And I don't know if Matti was just messing with me, but he said this was the place where they had the stone altar where they would sacrifice you and throw you off the cliff. I think he was just teasing.
Every culture has to have one of those. We're going to pick a cliff.
And of course, I had to have the obligatory photo. Here's the Arctic Circle, and we're over it. Now we're back. So there I am. And to prove that I wasn't making this up, there's still snow in May. Apparently the snow is high and deep, and it takes a long time to melt. There was no snow falling when I was there, but there definitely was still some snow yet to melt. So let's talk a little bit about the sauna. I had never been in a sauna before. I think maybe when I was 12 at the YMCA, maybe I was in there for about 10 minutes. But I always thought it was like a spa experience, very relaxing and fun and easygoing. But my experience was, no, it's a workout. Your heart is racing 1,000 miles an hour and you are sweating profusely. It's kind of like an exercise regimen sitting still. It's very, very hot. Here's an example. This is one of the administrators from the college. This is his sauna, and it's right on the lake. It's a beautiful setting, but it's very, very hot. And of course, they're adding water onto the hot rocks to get that steam, that humidity that really makes you sweat. One of the things that, as an American, if you travel to Finland and you have the sauna experience, is I wasn't really prepared for the nakedness. Right? It's not a big thing for them, but for Americans, we tend to have, we need a certain personal space, and we really don't really have that in America, where people are going to the sauna naked, and then part of the experience is then to run out to the cold lake and jump in. You don't need a towel. It was all one gender, so the men are just all together in one sauna, and the women are in a different one. In this case, it was just the guys having beers and going in the sauna. But that was something that was kind of a cultural shock to me. It was no big deal to them. I got used to it eventually. But that's something, if you go to Finland, that you would expect. All of your friends and colleagues from the college are just sitting right next to you on a wooden bench naked. So that's part of the culture. The other thing, too, I would say is that jumping into the cold water afterwards, the typical sauna routine is that you stay in the sauna for about 30 minutes, really sweating. After about 20, I was ready to be done, but I toughed it out. Then you run and jump into the lake, which was 41 degrees. And wow, that's a shock to the system. And then you go do it again. You do 2 rounds, typically. And what's interesting is that Wednesdays and Saturdays are considered the sauna days, right? That twice a week. And that's something that I really kind of got to understand, is it's not so much of a spa experience as more of like a cleansing workout experience. And that's the way that they view it. Here's another example of sort of, you would call it like a vacation property. Monty took me out. This is a place really deep in the wilderness, and we stayed the night in this log cabin. The thing about the Finns is they love getting out into the outdoors, whether it's camping with a tent, or they also have something that's called a wicket. I didn't think to include a photo, but it's a wooden lean-to. Right? So it's just got it's like made of logs, like a log cabin, but it's just 2 sides, makes like a triangle without the third part, and that's where you shelter in case it rains. And they have those everywhere. And anyone can just go ahead and just shelter under a wicket, or a little bit more high class, you get a full log cabin, like Matti treated us to. And how about this? We're near the Arctic Circle, right? So at the Arctic Circle, the sun in June and even in May doesn't set. And in fact, when it does set, it's really just sort of twilight, like sunset. So this photo I took out of the bedroom where I stayed at midnight. And you can see there's the sun. It's almost setting, but it never quite set. It just kind of sat there, and then it comes back up again. So it's kind of hard to keep track of time. It would be 11 p.m., and I have to go to sleep. Right? We have to get up tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. I love this photo. First of all, so we watched hockey at home. The Finnish national team was in the championships, and he has 3 adult sons, and they said, we need to go down to a pub and watch it on the big screen with all the Finns drinking beer and cheering and really getting into the hockey game. So we did. And so here we are sitting at the pub watching it on the big screen. And so I wanted to point out that hockey is everything for them. But in this photo, you get 2 for 1, because you see that red alert at the top? That's a bear alert. They're warning the people of Kajaani that a bear has crossed from the Russian border, is now roaming about in the Kajaani area, so it's best to stay indoors. Only in Finland, something like that. One of the things that Matti took me to see, because he knew I was interested in history and he knew this would be great for my history classes, is we went to the Russian border, and I learned a lot about the Second World War and what an awkward position that Finland was in. I think Finland just wanted to be neutral. But they were attacked by Russia, and really were not giving any assistance by the British. And so after being attacked by Russia, they sort of made an uneasy deal with Nazi Germany. They weren't formally allied with them. They just let the Germans come in with their military forces to help them keep the border safe from the Russians. And later, when the Finns signed a peace treaty with Russia, the Russians said part of the deal was you need to get those Germans out of there. And the Germans didn't want to leave. So the Finns had to end up fighting them. So they were sort of always in this awkward position. And a number of Finns apologized to me. They didn't need to, but on behalf of Finland to you in America, they wanted to say, we're really sorry we were on the wrong side. And I said, well, knowing history, I kind of understand what position you were in. But they feel kind of badly about that. But here you can see there are 2 bullet holes in this tree. These are from the Winter War, the Second World War, when Russia invaded Finland, and Finland fought back and didn't quite defeat the Russians, but the casualties for the Russians were 10 to 1. For every Finn that was killed, there were 10 Russians. And of course, what I found out as you peel back the layers of history, it gets more and more complicated. there really weren't so much the Russians that were fighting. There were a lot of Ukrainians that were forced by Stalin to fight. They didn't even want to be there. And they certainly didn't want to fight the Finns. If they even knew who they were, they certainly had no beef with them. And in fact, in one offensive, they had to get the Ukrainians drunk on vodka to get them to go fight, because they didn't want to kill the Finns and they certainly didn't want to die. Once a peace was declared, the Russians, the Ukrainians, and the Finns all met together on this hill where they had a big tree, not this one, where they carved their initials and some names and the date into this tree, and they called it the peace tree. And they shook hands and were like old buddies again. So really it just goes to show it was the governments and the generals that wanted to fight, not the common people. But here's 70 years later, here's bullet holes that are still in this tree, and I saw many of them. Here's an image from the Winter War. Stalin miscalculated when he invaded in November because it was cold and it was snowing, but it wasn't cold enough yet for the rivers and the swamps and the bogs to freeze. And so one thing about the geography of Finland is, if you know about Wisconsin or Minnesota, there's a lot of water. So it's wet. The Russians couldn't get the tanks through the forest. They had to stick to the roads, and the Finns were smart. They used camouflage. They had the cross-country skis, and they would ambush the tanks and vehicles on the road. And that would block the whole thing up, and the Russians couldn't get very far. And Finns today are very patriotic about this. When we were visiting, I saw a number of school buses come with children, school kids, to kind of teach them about their history, how little Finland stood up to big Russia. Here's a captured Russian tank. And here are some of the trenches that are still there, so right along the border. There are miles and miles of these.
Have they maintained them? Because they look great.
Yeah, these obviously they've maintained the wood, but they're the original trenches. And so they bring the school kids to come see, this is actually where the fighting happened. Some of the other photos that I saved for my students, I didn't want to bring them here. There are foxholes and dugouts and all sorts of little places where I took some pictures of it, and Matti and I sat in there and looked around and said, wow, this isn't very deep. If bullets were flying overhead, you'd really have to be careful. And of course, here's the border. And I had to get a photo. And Matti said, don't go too close. They have cameras and sensors and all of that. But I just had to get this photo and bring it back to you guys. So this is actually the border's a little bit farther inland, but you can't go past here. This is the end. On the other side, just down the road, is Russia.
What if you do?
That's a great question. I don't know if you'd get shot, but I bet you'd get arrested and probably have some very stern interrogation as to what you were doing and why you were there. I mean, no, I'm not that brave. So many schools I visited, just so many, from the elementary schools to the high schools to the different colleges. The thing I would tell you about Finland is they're very big on vocational education, and they want to get even bigger. So the traditional baccalaureate degree, college experience, they still have that, but they want to focus more on training. They want to give their students skills, whether it's in engineering or math or accounting, that you learn what you need to learn. You get hands-on practice with a firm in the field, and you get a job. Now, for those of us that teach music and art and history and things like that, we might not like to see that trend, because I generally tend to feel that getting a well-rounded education makes you a good person, whether you're designing robots or you're an accountant. But one of the things they're moving towards is focusing very specifically on what the students need and sort of eliminating everything else. So one of the places I visited was a sports science program. They have a campus dedicated to the high-level Olympic athletes and a lot of training and science to kind of help these athletes reach their best performance. And what was really interesting is in this Olympic Sports Center, they had a year-round cross-country ski tunnel, which I'll show you. So it's 1 kilometer long, so you can get 2 kilometers of skiing going to the end and coming back. And they keep it at a constant -6 Celsius, which is about like 10 degrees or so, 12 degrees. And here's the tunnel. So you get your cross-country skis on and you can ski every day, right? Even in the middle of summer. So they've got this tunnel. And of course, here's a picture of the ski jump. They had training facilities for all of the athletes, most of which I didn't think to take photos of, but hockey, tennis, track and field, any winter or summer sport, they had it there. And it was really interesting because there were some athletes, I don't know if they were Olympians, but they had entourages, carrying bags. And so all of these elite athletes were coming in and getting this training or going in to visit with doctors or physical therapists, to measure, whatever moves they were doing. That they had like a computer capture camera to sort of see like how they could improve. Or I saw a lot of apparatus for breathing, like to sort of test like how much lung capacity you had. So all that sort of high-tech sports stuff, that's what they're doing in Finland. Well, who would have known? So I had a chance to visit the University of Oulu. And what really struck me, and I'll show you from this map here, is that the campus had, I believe, 18,000 students. NIU has around 20,000, so if you're familiar with Northern Illinois University. So those two campuses are about the same size. But in Finland, all of the buildings are connected, much like MCC. You don't have to go outside. So I thought, okay, they're really thinking. So I couldn't even get to the end of campus. I walked from where the red circle was up there down to about the orange here. I couldn't get to the end. It was just too far. So it's many, many kilometers of buildings all together. And what was really fascinating about the university, so I had a chance to talk to the history professors there and to talk to some of the students. This is something that as an American and as a parent, I did not know. But any student who has the grades to get accepted into Finland's university system from any country can go there for free. The taxpayers fund it. Wow, where was this news when I needed it when my daughter was ready to go off to college last year? However, like all good things, eventually they come to an end. The government is talking about changing that policy of charging at least a token tuition for outside people. And the logic is, of course, they don't have any families that live there that paid into the tax system. But I ran into a group of students that were protesting this. And so I asked them why. What's happening and why are you protesting these potential changes? And they said the reason why is that the thing they like about the university system is that there are a lot of international students who are obviously there because it's a good education for free. And they said if we start charging tuition, why would they come to Finland? Because it's so dark and so cold in the winter. They'll go to Italy or somewhere else. And so they were really protesting to try to keep this in place. So we'll see what happens. I'll watch the news and find out what happens in the fall. But I thought that was interesting, that the education is free. And that's one of the themes I'm going to talk about when I get to the Finnish educational system. Everything's paid for. The taxpayers put the money in, and it comes out for the students, whatever they need, from young to old, it's paid for. So here's where this university is. This is Oulu. It's a northern city, and from what I'm told, it's a growing, prosperous city. There are a lot of people that are moving here. So maybe this will be the Helsinki of the future. And I thought it was a really nice place. Aha. This I was really proud of. The thing about Finland and about Europe in general is they're very bureaucratic. There are forms and documents for everything. They want to make sure everything is squared away. On this particular day when I visited the University of Oulu, Matti couldn't be with me. He had to teach. And so I had to find my own way there. And it was about a 2.5-hour drive. And so the university teachers let me borrow a car. Now, they had to go through a lot of paperwork, and they actually had to get the government. And here's my document that I would carry with me in case I was pulled over by the police or asked by anyone why I was driving an official state of Finland car. But I got it, so I was vetted and good to go. So I was able to drive myself there and get back without incident. I wonder if this has an expiration. If I go back, if I can use it again.
What side of the road did they drive on?
The same as us. And here's an interesting thing. They asked me if I could drive a manual transmission, and I could. because 90% of the cars are manual. They don't have automatics there. They don't really see why. Kind of also with dryers, right? They have washing machines, but then why waste the electricity with a dryer when you can hang it up on the line? And in the winter, you just hang it up inside. Another interesting thing, too, about Finland, I don't know if this was just Mati's family, but you're given one towel for the week. And you hang it up and let it dry, right? And you use your towel for 7 days, and then you get a new one, and then they wash it. So again, being very efficient and very concerned about the environment and wasting electricity or money. So, but cars, whether you're at the elementary school or the university, if you need to go somewhere, you don't have to worry about filling out the MCC travel form for mileage. What they do is they say, you take this college car and you drive to where you need to go and you come back. They always have a fleet of cars, I noticed, whatever school I was at, and that the employees can drive these cars wherever they need to go. Bus passes too. If you need to go somewhere, whether it's by train, bus, or car, your employer takes care of you. You just go. You don't have to worry about paying for it. That was really interesting. So let me tell you a little bit about the school system. So here's the schematic. You'll notice that they don't start till the age of 7. I thought that was really interesting. They do have what we would call daycare. And what's interesting about that is the law in Finland is you get 3 years of maternal or paternal leave. So if you have a baby, the mother and father get to choose among themselves how they want to divvy up that 3 years. So mom can take the whole 3 years off at full pay. Whatever she's getting from her employer, the government will match that. They will pay that to her so she can stay home. If both parents want to stay home, they can take 1.5 years together, both of them. Or if dad takes 1 year and mom takes 2 years, however they want to divide it up, you have 3 years to work with. That was very impressive. But at age 7, right, whether your child's staying home with mom or whether you're going to daycare, after those 3 years are up, that's when they start. So they don't have what we would consider to be preschool or kindergarten. And one of the things that they really impressed upon me is equality. They want all kids in Finland to have the same start. And I think part of the philosophy is that you should, between 0 and 7, you should just be a kid. You should be at home playing and coloring and reading with your family. You shouldn't have any rigid studies. But at age 7, everyone starts from the same point. Whereas in the United States, obviously, we have students coming in at different levels and abilities, depending on whether they went to preschool or what the background of their parents were. But the Finnish idea is everyone's equal, and everyone starts and has the same exact curriculum at age 7. And so, from 7 to 16, you have what they call the primary school. So some of them are in one building. Sometimes they're in 3 different buildings, depending on the ages. But they just simply call it comprehensive school or primary school. At age 16, that's when you start the secondary school, and that's when you and your parents have to make a decision. Whether you're going to go to a vocational school or whether you're going to go what they call the lukio. The lukio is the college prep high school from 16 to 19. So you've got vocational schools, apprenticeships, and then what here they call the senior secondary school, but they call it the lukio. So I got to visit all of these different schools. And when you graduate, they call it leaving, not graduating, but when you leave school and you pass your tests, then you can go on to the university or the polytechnic. And what's interesting is that whichever track you take, this is not the easy track. There still is a lot of math and science. And in fact, what's missing from here is they actually have a doctorate degree in the vocational track. So if you want to become a computer scientist, if you're interested in theory, maybe you would take this track. If you're interested in coding, you would take this track. And there's no problem if you want to switch. And this was one of the questions I had. What about in the secondary school, what if I go to the vocational school and decide, you know what, I don't want to do this. I want to study philosophy. Can I switch? And they said, no problem. Not at all. They make it so that you can very easily switch. And that's one of the things that's different from, let's say, Germany or the Netherlands. That once you pick, you're pretty much stuck there. So they want to keep it as flexible as possible.
Do all the graduates go on to
That's a good question. Many. Well, the same as here. I mean, there are a lot of people who work in the service industry. And one of the questions I had, especially with tourism, is how many, they're not hiring travel agents anymore. Like, what kind of tourism jobs are there? And, can everybody get a job in tourism? Because I thought, no, it's got to be limited. So I think just like here, if you don't get that dream job, there are a lot of service jobs in restaurants and at stores and things like that. As far as factory jobs, I didn't really see any. And I think a lot of that is going to Asia and other places where labor is low cost. What I noticed is a lot of students were interested in computers, software, and at least in Kajaani, tourism. Those would be the big three.
Do you know what the income tax is there to pay for all that?
Yeah, and in fact, to follow up with the percentage on the college, this is just based on my memory, but I'm pretty sure this is accurate. About 75% of the high school or secondary graduates go on to get some sort of college training, some sort of post-secondary. And I don't have any information or statistics as to how many of those actually get jobs. That's something I was wondering. So 75% at least give higher education a try. And then your question, what about the taxes? How do they pay for all of this? It's a progressive income tax, meaning that if you don't make a lot of money, you don't pay very much tax. So I forget the cutoffs, but let's just arbitrarily say it was about 30,000 euros, which would be about 32,000 US dollars. Anything less than that, you don't pay tax on that at all. Between 30,000 and 45,000, you pay 20%. Between 45 and 85, you pay like 35%. And anything over 85,000, I think it's 60%. So or maybe it's 50%, but it's a lot. So if you make a lot of money, you pay a lot of tax. If you don't make very much money at all, it's not that much. So I thought that was really interesting how they do it. But overall, I think the average citizen there pays more taxes than we do. But they get more in return. So let me see if I can remember what are the things that the government pays for. So we talked about maternity leave, right? So that's paid for. Education, all the way up, through a doctorate degree. You don't have to apply for a scholarship or a fellowship or a teaching assistantship. Healthcare, right? So they have a single payer system where you pay your taxes and when you're sick, you go to the doctor. Or when you need to go to the hospital, you go in. The only complaint that I heard is, I know Matti said that he had a problem with his foot, some swelling, and he only got 12 minutes with the doctor. And he really felt it was serious, and the doctor said, no, you'll be just fine. I'll see you in 3 months. So Matti said he was thinking about paying cash to go see a private doctor, because you have that option, to make sure his foot was really the swelling was going to go down. So, but you do get to see a doctor, and I didn't hear any horror stories of people waiting, for 6 months or a year, or, having a toothache, but you do have to wait your turn. So, and there are 5.5 million people and only so many doctors and dentist slots. So I guess there's a balance. Senior care, right? If you end up in a nursing home, right, the government pays for that. I think we mentioned education. And there might be 1 or 2 things I'm forgetting. But there are a lot of things that you get for that.
Do they have if you're disabled or something like that, don't you get money from the government for that also?
Yes, if you're disabled. If you're unemployed, I don't know what it is for unemployment. I know what it is in Denmark. In Denmark, you get unemployment as long as you're looking for a job for 6 months. And if you haven't found a job in 6 months, you have to go work for the government to get your unemployment check. But that's Denmark, that's not Finland. But they do have a pretty comprehensive plan.
Do they have something like a pension plan if you're over 65 or 70?
They do. And that's one of the things the high school teachers were complaining about to me, that they raised the retirement age for that plan, and I believe it was either 67 or 69. Because I remember thinking, wow, that's kind of similar to what it is, or even a little bit harsher than what it is in the United States. So they might have been raising it from 67 to 69. But they do. They do have a pension plan for people who work, and those who don't have, their own pension, like through a teaching job, the government has something similar to Social Security. So how about some other questions? Yeah.
And I think it's backwards.
Let's go back.
On your last slide on the education system.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to check, did you say that the curriculum for ages 7 to 16 is all the same throughout the country?
Yes. And that's the one point that I think Matti would want me to make. This is what he told, because he came to study our system. So he got to visit a number of schools. And Woodstock North High School, we got to go visit there. And he looked around and he said, this building is beautiful. And the principal was really talking about all of the good things they do there. And he said, we don't have such a school in Finland. We don't have a secondary school anywhere close to as good as this school. He said, but what we do have is we have a lot of very decent average schools. He said, I'm willing to bet that there are some schools in the United States that you haven't taken me to that are not good. He said, we don't have those in Finland. He said, because the money for the schools comes directly from the central government. So the taxes come in, the money goes to the schools. Based on the total number of students is the amount of funding that you get at your school. It's all exactly the same. So that's what I experienced. I saw a lot of schools that seemed very average, right? That were not flashy. They didn't have a lot of high technology. They weren't big or shiny or had large programs of music or sports or anything like that. But they had small class sizes with dedicated teachers and students who really seemed like they wanted to be there, that were working hard. So in, old desks and old chairs in regular old classrooms. So that's, I think, the secret. It's not really magic. They just are very equal in how they dole it out.
If I remember correctly from my reading, all of the instructors are expected to have master's degrees, and their program is very difficult.
Yes.
And I read, and I don't remember correctly, I read the 5 smartest, what's it called, the 5 smartest children in the world, and how they got that way. And I believe that it was I think it was Finland, but now after I'm listening to you talk, I thought maybe it was Denmark, I don't remember, but it's one of those 2 countries. And they said that they have a very stringent educational system for their instructors, that compared to the United States, our teachers are not well educated, and their teachers are, and they all have to have a master's degree no matter what level at which you teach.
That's true.
That
It is.
true?
They had 2 major changes in their educational system. The first one was in the late 1960s, and the second one was in the early 2000s. And that's where they implemented a lot of these changes. And one of the things they wanted to do is get the best quality teachers. And so they raised the pay, but they also tried to raise the status of the profession, so that being a teacher would be considered as prestigious as a doctor or a lawyer. And so they raised the entrance exams and the competitive level, the standards for teachers. So it's really, really difficult to get into the School of Education at a university and to graduate and to get a degree. They've made it really competitive, and apparently that's been working really well.
Do you know how Finnish students rank in terms of education right now?
I do. I'm going to show you a slide. In fact, let me just skip ahead so I can show you some of this. I don't know if they're #1 this year. And I was talking to some Swedes that were really kind of put out because they're like #8. And they said, the Finns don't do anything different than we do. It's just that, for whatever reason, things worked out and they scored higher. Not by a lot, just by a little bit. So I thought that was interesting, that Sweden is really doing some similar things to Finland, not exactly the same. So it just goes to show you they're not always #1. But what they're proud about is that their average is good.
Before you change the slide, I was wondering about the vocational path. So at the age of 16, if you want to be a plumber, you go into the vocational path.
Yeah.
By the time you're 19, you already have your apprenticeship or whatever, and plumbing or whatever.
Right, so if you wanted to learn a trade, such as plumbing or welding, and one of the things I learned is that welders are in demand even here, and they make good money. You would go and you would get your training so that you would know how to use the equipment and be very good at whether it's plumbing or welding. And they would set you up with an internship, and most of those people end up with a job lined up. And in fact, the thing I heard that was the most common from the administrators at these vocational colleges is that a lot of the employers were trying to poach the students before they finished their degree or certificate. And they said, no, just wait a year, let them finish up, right? Because they were well trained, they really wanted these students. So, and I thought that was really, because what we do in the United States is we really leave a lot of it to the student and say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And good luck with that. We hope you could try out a few different things. Here they have very specific programs, and their guidance counselors are working with the students between ages 7 and 16, trying to find out what are you good at, what do you like, let's go observe. In fact, when I was there, this is for the elementary age students. These students were between like 9 and 10. They were taking them there to learn about environmental studies, like the people who sample the water and all of these sort of different jobs. And at the same time, they were learning about fish and how the clean water helps the fish to be healthy, and where do packaged fish come from? And they were showing how to catch a fish and clean the fish, and what the different species of fish were. So they were sort of getting a biology lesson at the same time as a vocational, sort of like this is a career you could have lesson. So they do a lot of that, a lot of hands-on training. And in fact, that's this next slide here. This is their English brochure, where they talk about hands-on training. So I got to meet with some music students they actually go out on gigs and play. They interact with students from other colleges, like for example in Glasgow, Scotland. And so they're making all these connections so in their future, when they go on to perform, that they'll know something about the field. All of the students are required to learn Finnish and English starting at age 7. So they start right away. When they get to age 10, they have to learn Swedish, because officially Finland is a bilingual country, because it once used to be part of Sweden. And I think the famous quote from one of their former presidents after World War II, Kekkonen, I think was his last name, he said, "We are no longer Swedes, we don't want to be Russians, so let us be Finns." But because about 6% of the population is Swedish, and they have this legacy, like Canada, it's officially bilingual, and they have to learn Swedish age 10. And every student I talked to hated it. They said, I don't want to learn Swedish. Because at the music program, this one woman who is a vocalist, a singer, she said, I want to learn Spanish, because outside of the English market, Spanish would be number 2 for people to hear my music, right, Latin America. And I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. The ones that were in the tourism training wanted to learn Russian, because those are a lot of the tourists who are coming over because they share a border with Russia. So I thought that was really interesting.
Do they have other languages available at
Oh, yeah.
the college level?
Even at the high school level. So at age 10, so you're already learning Finnish grammar and you're learning English as a second language. At age 10, and you start learning Swedish as a third language. And then I think it was around age 14, that's when you can choose to study German or Spanish or Russian. I did ask him, what about Arabic or Mandarin Chinese? And they looked at me like I was crazy. I was like, okay, that's a big thing in America, it's a big market, but no, they're not a lot of students are learning Arabic or Chinese, so for whatever that's worth.
So how many years do they have to learn Swedish?
Until they leave school, which is at least 16, maybe 19.
6 years.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So here, someone asked the question, where do they rank? Number 1, pretty much. You could choose a year, choose a category, and usually as far as like the examinations or tests, they score really high. This one, the United States is not on this chart, but here we are, we're at number 26. What are we doing wrong? Well, I went there to find out, and what I realized is we're not really doing anything wrong. It's just that we have 325 million people, and they have a little over 5. I think a fair comparison would be to compare the state of Minnesota to Finland. And you would probably see, okay, then the United States, at least Minnesota's system, is not so far below Finland. We just have more students, and we have, I think, a wider socioeconomic divide that we have to kind of deal with, right? Whether we're talking about Mississippi or Texas or Maine. Finland doesn't. I think a fair comparison would be to compare Europe to the United States, because that would be about the same number of people, and different geography, different socioeconomic backgrounds. But little old Finland's always at the top because they're a relatively well-off country, and they choose to share their resources. That's their secret. That's all there is to it. There's no Einstein program that we could really copy that would make our students score any better. It's just, I think, demographics, really. So here's some interesting things. Okay, so what do you get in school? No fees of any kind. Pencils and pens, whatever you need. I don't know about backpacks, but definitely the school supplies, the government supplies those. You don't have to go out for back-to-school shopping for that. Transportation.
I heard that sound.
Yeah, they don't have the yellow school buses. You ride the public buses, but the students get a pass. And the students can just take the bus wherever they need to go for free. This was really shocked me. Food. I didn't have to pay for any food when I was there, especially at the schools, because whenever you're hungry, you sit down and eat. Now, usually they have 4 times. They have breakfast, lunch, afternoon snack, and then dinner. Right? So if you're hungry, you come at that time. It's like an hour to an hour and a half window. And you line up and you get your food and you sit down and eat. And I was looking, well, where do I pay? And so, no, the students eat for free, the faculty and guests of the faculty. You just come and you eat when you're hungry. And it was good food, right? Really good quality food. So that was something I thought was really interesting. And the employees too, right? So you would just come to our cafeteria and you would just eat, right, on the house, right? Or really you're paying taxes, but your tax money at work. Health and dental services, the dentist is right at the school. Okay, so you go in for your dental checkup for the kids. The doctor is at the school as well. Psychological counseling. So there's a lot of things that are included that was really interesting. So high school graduation rate, 93%. So they're not perfect. I mean, that's pretty good. What about those other 7%? You know, there are kids that drop out of school, but in Canada it's 78, in the US it's 75. Oh, okay, here you go. I was wrong. Not 75%, but 66% go on to college in Finland. And apparently that's also the highest in Europe as well. So this is something that they really emphasize to their students, that education is important. And here's what I observed with my own eyes in 14 days, is that the students really wanted to be there, and that they were really well behaved, and I gave some guest lectures, and they paid attention and asked questions, and everyone had done their homework. So why and how does this happen? I think it's a cultural thing. I think it's just a Finnish thing that the Finnish parents tell their kids, you're going to do your homework, and this is important, and this is what we value. Do all the students do that? No, there are probably a few goofing off, and I didn't see them. But by and large, I was really impressed with how that was just expected. And I asked the students about that, and they said, well, we never really thought about it. It's just what we do. You know, school's important. This is what we're here to do. So that really impressed me. So maybe it's not so much the educational system. Maybe it's a cultural thing, right? It's just what they impart to their kids.
So they all have iPhones and iPads.
Yes, but they don't bring them out during class. So it seems like every kid has a mobile phone, but I didn't see them come out at any point, right? So, the kids weren't staring down at their lap, looking. So they have them, but they just know when to turn them off and not to use them. So that impressed me as well. And then about the teachers, right? They're required to have a master's degree, and that only the top 10% of graduates are accepted into teaching programs. So the 2 pink ones there are the ones that got in it. So it's highly competitive. And from what I learned from talking to the teachers really wanted to get into the field. So as I mentioned, they're as esteemed as doctors or lawyers. This is, you can just look at the pictures. This is one of the history exams. So you might not be able to read the Finnish, of course. But this history teacher, this was for 16-year-olds, trying to get them to learn not just about historical figures, but about sports culture and propaganda, and trying to interpret data like graphs. And so what's the secret? It really isn't a secret. It's their society. That's what I think I took away from it. Other questions?
How was the food? Was
It was fresh and natural and sometimes kind of bland. But, I got to try reindeer and moose stew, a lot of fish. One of the things they love is fish soup. So fish soup is tasty and hearty, but it's not the same as eating in like France or Italy. So that's how I would answer that. They have a lot of healthy, high-quality foods, not a lot of sugar. So fruits and vegetables, and by vegetables I mean potatoes. They just eat a lot of potatoes. So not a lot of green salads.
They eat to live versus live to eat, we do.
Yes, yes. Other questions?
Any mosquitoes in the wilderness?
I got lucky. Monty told me, he said the mosquitoes, they still sleep from the winter cold. And the day before I left is when they came out, and I was glad they were sleeping for the other 13 days. So yeah. So just like Minnesota or Wisconsin, they have a lot of mosquitoes.
So what was the temperature there when you were there?
When I was there, it was between 45 and 65 degrees. I think there were a couple of days when it was, kind of mildly warm, like 70 or 72. But again, it was in Celsius, so I couldn't quite tell it. The temperature usually was like 14 to 16, which I think is like in the 60s.
Is there still snow on the ground when you were there?
Yes, yes.
In May, that's in May?
In May. In any of the spots that were kind of shady, there are still big piles of snow that was still melting.
I noticed like in Germany, they're families, but they're not all necessarily married, or like there's institutions that they just don't care about. Did you find that there? Like what is, like their divorce rate similar to ours, or?
Well, I didn't learn anything about the divorce rate, but what I did notice is that not as many people like go to church on Sundays or are affiliated with organized religion, and I think along with that, they don't get married. I think we would call that like a common law marriage, where a man and woman just sort of get together and live together and have children, and they have a stable family life, but there's no official document. Now, I would want to look into that a little bit more about like a civil marriage, like before a municipal judge, because I wonder if for like tax purposes or things that you would get, like services, like the maternity and paternity leave, if you'd have to be married. My guess is probably no, probably not, but I don't know. But that's a good question, and I did notice it was different there than it is here.
I don't. I wonder.
How involved are the parents with the schools, with their children in the school?
I think they're very involved. My only example would be Mati and Christina, and so their boys are in college or university level, and I know Matthias was still living at home, and he would spend a couple hours every evening working on his homework, and his parents would remind him about that, and he wouldn't give him any back talk. He would go and do his homework. He was, like I said, it's sort of a cultural thing. Another thing I would add about the Finnish cultural thing is that all young men have to serve for 1 year in the army, right? Because Russia's next door. And women can choose to serve when they're 18. 25% of young women choose to serve in the army. And so I was talking to some students about that, and they said, well, it's just the thing that you do, right? It's Finland, and everyone's got, just like paying taxes and doing your homework, we also serve to defend our country. So there sort of seems like it's really a service-based kind of sociology to their culture.
It sounds like it's more of a we culture, not an I culture.
Yeah, that's what I took away from it.
For the 0 to 7-year-olds, is there any sort of informal learning programs? Do they teach them how to read and numbers?
That I didn't come across, and I'm sure there is, because I know they have daycare, and so I didn't get to visit any daycare centers. But what the teachers, for those who start at age 7, were trying to press upon me is that there isn't an emphasis on any student sort of getting ahead. Like they want you to come in at age 7 as a blank slate, not knowing how to read yet, not knowing any math, that you're just going to, everyone's going to come in at age 7 and we're going to start at the same page.
Is there a lot of immigration there? Like,
Aha, I was wondering about that. Okay. The short answer is no, not in Finland. Maybe in Sweden and Germany there's more. But in Finland, I was kind of curious because I was watching the news. And so I had a chance, I was in Helsinki for one evening before I went up to Kajaani. So I had an hour and a half to walk around Helsinki. And I thought, well, if there are any immigrants that are coming in, I would see them here. And I walked around and I didn't really see anyone other than Finns. And then I noticed that there were a lot of Italian teenagers. And I thought, wait a minute, these kids aren't Italian, they're Syrian. Aha. But the reason why I thought they were Italian is because they had nice shoes and they were well dressed and their hair was combed real nice. And they're just kind of hanging out in the park chilling. I just thought they were normal teenagers that were of Italian descent. And that's when I realized, no, wait a minute, they must be Syrian. So from the hour and a half I was in Helsinki, I saw about 15 Syrian teenagers. And that's it. So I would say I didn't see a big impact of immigration, not in Finland.
Too cold and dark.
Maybe. So I guess we're out of time. I have to
What does
get
your family do for recreation? Do they have park districts or do they go to fitness centers? What do they do?
nature. I would answer it with one word, nature. They go out looking for berries, and they do a lot of gardening and hiking, kayaking, anything that involves fishing, going boating, cross-country skiing, right? Bike riding. We did a lot of bike riding. Yeah, anything in nature, especially in the north. So thanks, everyone.